So what I'd like to do now is I'll actually turn my camera off, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe, and he's going to make some quick introductions. Lastly, I want to give a special thanks to Bryan and Casey for taking time today to share all of your knowledge with us. So thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So for those of you who do or do not know, I'm Joe Michuda with Michuda Construction. I'm part owner with my brother, Mark. You'll see on the wall behind us here are the charcoal portraits of our forebears. And my brother and I like to joke that if somebody walks into the office with a charcoal and a sketch pad, then one of the two of us is in trouble. So hopefully we won't see any charcoal sketch pads coming out anytime soon. Many of you have seen us at the HESNI events, competitors alike, and some clients in the crowd. And today's topic is about working in occupied healthcare facilities, both acute and non-acute. And it is different. Many of us know that. We try and adopt the credo, though our mantra is do no harm, because when we work in occupied space, which is the majority of what Michuda does in healthcare, we do build out of the ground new facilities, but seems like the majority of things we do, the messier, the better. And so we realize that it takes a little different mindset. We like to say 24/7, 365 head on a swivel. Because every move you make within an occupied healthcare facility can affect patient outcomes. And that's why we adopt the mantra, do no harm. So the face of our company, we also realize the face of the company is not people that sit in the office. The face of our company is the folks out in the field. They're the folks that get stuff done. They're the people that coordinate with the various stakeholders. And so with that, I'd like to quickly introduce, first is Casey O'Callahan. Casey is one of our superintendents. He's working on a project out in Hoffman Estates. Casey's got over 16 years of experience, and I think it's about 5 years with us, Casey. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And Ryan Pepper. Ryan Pepper's been in the industry for 17 years, on and off, I think about 14 years with Michuda. Is that about right?
Yes, that's correct.
So today's slides are not going to be about reading slides because anybody can do that. The slides will be made available after the presentation through HESNI. And just so you're all aware, this is being recorded. So that I believe you can get a copy of this later on too. But I am going to turn this over to both Casey and Bryan. I'm going to try and stay out of talking and let them relate probably a lot of war stories, because that's what we all like to hear, is about the boots on the ground war stories. So with that, I'm going to toss this over and let the guys take over.
All right, Joel, thanks for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. What is occupied space in healthcare facility? An acute or offsite facility where the contractor operations could have a potential adverse impact on patient outcomes. This includes patient staff, visitors, as well as the facility. We need to be highly aware and have great care while working in these areas, because our actions can have an effect on the patient's outcomes. So there's a lot of coordination and a lot of planning that we do up front. And starting that off is, a PICRA, which would be our pre-construction risk assessment. And while we're creating that PICRA, we're going to create an ICRA and an ILSM at the same time. And that ICRA and that ILSM are unique to occupied space, being that, there are patients and visitors at these facilities who are immunocompromised, and our actions can impact their healing process. So it's always good to have coordination early on with staff, as well as design meetings to bring in our means and methods, materials, our plans, and our phasing to address these for a successful project. At this time, discussions on means and methods may have potential schedule impacts. It's good to have an idea of what materials are being used so we can get those ordered up. As we all know, lead times are an issue. So to keep our schedules on track, we want to have these discussions soon as we can. We had a project, Northwest Cook County Hospital up there. We were working outside, fire lane, a lot of coordination. Reached out to all team leaders at the facility, dispatching for the paramedics coming into the facility with patients, as well as the fire chief of the village, being that we're in the fire lane and any supporting vehicles may be impeded by our operations. So communication is a very important tool to get the message out early on. Seems to be sometimes some folks don't get the message. So we like to get that out very early so we can get that feedback and dial in our project. So those are a couple things that we want to be looking at early on, coordination and communication to have successful projects.
So I wanted to drop back real quick on a slide. You know, when I mentioned we do both out of the ground and occupied, you know, that bottom sentence is important because skill sets in healthcare for new facilities in a cornfield or dedicated site don't necessarily translate well to working within occupied facilities. It's a different posture, it's a different mindset, it's a different culture. We always like to say to our folks in the field that if you're working in the hospital, how would you conduct yourself if one of your family members was in the bed next door to our containment area? You know, and that's where you make that mental connection of that, yeah, we could have an impact. So if you think of it in that context, so it is different. And that's just one of the other ways it is different. And certainly the technical skill sets that go into healthcare construction, there's a lot of similarities, but it's when you add that risk profile of working amongst patients, visitors, staffs, in and around facilities with utilities, med gas, what have you, it's a little different. And, you know, we struggle with that internally a little bit, that when we're doing out of the ground and making sure that the folks that we select to work in occupied versus new, that we adjust our perspective, if you will. So yeah, good point, Bryan, about ICRA, about driving cost schedule. I'm sure both of you guys have been through projects where you're kind of in a small space, but it may be chopped into, you know, umpteen phases. And those phases could be, you know, not hundreds of square feet, but square feet, depending on where you're working. So I'm sure you guys have had some experience with that as well.
Right, Joe. I remember when I came on that I remember you saying that, you know, 24/7 head on a swivel. The other thing that kind of sticks in my mind, that's one of those things you learn in third grade science, is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So everything you do has a potential to cause serious problems. And one of those instances, out at one of the jobs we were doing about a year and a half ago, we had to do some saw cutting for underground plumbing. And just like typical, the saw cutters came out and scanned the floor for us. And we were in a space that was directly adjacent to the ORs. And the ground was painted with so many different colors and lines that it kind of freaked everybody out. And one of the steps that we did, well, a few of the steps we did to make sure that it did not cause an issue, especially being right near the ORs, is one, to work off hours. You know, so we didn't start cutting until about 9 o'clock at night. We also had 2 electricians there with us babysitting, just in case something were to have happened. They could have been there to jump in and restore power right away. And then one of the other things that actually the plumber came up with, and I'm glad he was there to provide a little bit of expertise, was he required the saw cutters to flip every block they cut that same night, because we did 2 nights straight of cutting, so they could have come and sliced everything up in one shot and then came back the next day and started flipping blocks. But we made sure to cut and flip and check every single little slab of concrete to make sure there wasn't conduit or something else running underneath. And luckily we were fortunate, but those steps, I think, are some of the things that we look at before a project begins and as we're getting started to kind of minimize that potential impact to patient care.
So yeah, the coordination is very important in these areas. Again, reaching out to all team leaders, department heads, nursing staff, as well as the end user. They're going to be the ones that are using these areas day to day. So their feedback is greatly appreciated. So we can do things once and not have to come back in and, rearrange things in a manner that works better for the end user. Most of the time, these relationships that are built between contractor and the staff are positive. We are guests at their work. We're welcomed in there to do a project, but at the end of the day, we are guests at that facility, and we need to do what is asked of us. A lot of times, we'll reach out to folks that may not have any direct involvement in project development or construction, but their feedback and their day-to-day routines may be impacted on some of our plans of upcoming work. So we want to, hear their opinions on things and address those and respect that and move forward. A lot of times, it's a good thing. There's no such thing as too much communication. We had a project where we were saw cutting on the outside of the building across a fire lane, which was the direct route for the ambulance coming into that facility. So we, again, reached out to all parties, proposed a plan and a schedule to do this work. And it was, asked to tighten that schedule up and minimize the days that we were out there. So we were able to take coordination between Michuda and our subcontractors, as well as the help from facilities, to take about a 10-day project and compress it into 3 days. Working together to come up with those plans, minimize the impact and the disruption of that fire lane. And it was a great success with no issues. And a lot of people didn't even notice that the work was completed. Didn't even know that we were out there because we had put all that planning up front, dialed it in, got the message out there to the proper folks, and we're able to have a win on that.
Yeah, like you said, Brian, the relationships are really important for us, especially when we are working directly next to staff and patients. Some of the same issues came up for me working in the SPD project, and we were right on the other side of containment from staff that were performing vital operations for the hospital. So we did a lot of dancing around and coordinating, being able to move equipment that they were using, so that way we could move it out of the way to do flooring work or ceiling, sprinklers, stuff like that. And then when that part of it is done with, then you're coordinating again to move it back in place. And a lot of times it involves more than one department. So in the instance of the SPD, there are the sterile processing staff, but there are also the OR staff that use the product that is being put out by SPD. And then I'm sure you dealt with the same thing. Is one of the major ones at some of the facilities is IT. That can be one of the largest headaches to forecast ahead of time, to make sure that their phones and computers and things that construction workers don't necessarily depend on like they do is up and running and moved out of the way and put back together almost instantly when something is complete.
Yeah, and also the handoff of that new equipment is critical as well. So we've been installing, new hardware, new air handlers throughout. So that communication and that handoff to the facilities is also very important to make sure that the end user is understanding of the operations of that piece of equipment, as far as, potential troubleshooting or any issues that may arise in the future. So yeah, that's, that communication goes a long way, and it's much needed. So.
Well, let me decipher some of the alphabet soup because healthcare loves acronyms. So PD&C, I'm sure you all know, planning, design, construction. Casey mentioned SPD, sterile processing. The slide shows AHJ, which I'm sure everybody knows is authority having jurisdiction. So that can involve IDPH, Joint Commission, DNV, village, city inspectors. And, the constant coordination too comes into play because many of these projects are multiple phased and you have to have all these interim inspections. And Brian, you were sharing a story about the plumbing inspector of how you need to phase that in and anticipate.
Yeah, Joe, we were a couple of times forecasting these inspections to stay on schedule. So we would ask our contractors, their duration of work and, best guess, when they would be ready for an inspection. So there was a few times that we had scheduled inspections for a date and we had not even began the project yet. But we were on a tight schedule. We committed to that schedule. So we were pulling out all the stops, and it gave us a goal for our subcontractors, and we achieved that. But it helped out because we were able to turn these spaces back over to the facility at no extended period of time, so we could keep them up and running as well.
And Joe, I just want to add, we had a question. Could you explain the acronyms PICRA, ICRA, ILSM?
Yeah, pre-con risk assessment, infectious control risk assessment, and interim life safety measures. Did I get that right?
Yes.
I got it right. Okay, so yeah, and if there are questions and we can answer them along the way, we certainly will try and do so. But I think I got it. Yeah. So let's, anything else? I'll click forward.
Yeah, so phasing is with occupied space work is extremely common, and it is one of those things that sometimes we're involved in the front end process of developing how a project is going to be approached in the phases and the orders, but there are times when that is already established before we even come to the table. So you're kind of stuck working within the confines of something that somebody else, like an architect or hospital project manager, whoever, has already kind of developed. But there are times where we are involved on the front end and we do get to give input on how those phases are divided up, and they ask our opinion of what the best route to go is. As it shows on the slide, a lot of times the above ceiling and below ground MEPs drive the actual phases other than the architectural layout, because you can't just start in an area and think you're going to finish it without thinking about how the power is going to get to the equipment, how are the sewer lines going to get to the bathrooms, the toilets, any machinery. So there are many other considerations other than, what does it look like, and what area, what is this serving for the client, and what kind of order they want to get it done in. So for the past 2 years, this is solely what I have been working on as phased projects. The first one being sterile processing remodel, which was it was a remodel to the entire department. So we relocated a cart washer, the instrument washers, basically every piece of equipment that they use wound up in a different spot than where it currently was. And as we mentioned before, coordinating with the staff, that was a huge part of it because some of that equipment had to be down. And you have to keep that to as minimum of time as possible. So that way, again, you're not impacting patient outcome. One of the major obstacles that we ran into for the sterile processing project was the underground plumbing. The underground drawings that were supplied were as-built drawings, and anybody that's in the industry knows that that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how the job was built out. So we were in an area where we had to cut the floor to tie in drains for new sterilizers. And there was no plumbing available for us to send a camera down where we could locate the lines as they were shown on the drawing. So we actually ended up cutting an exploratory hole where it should have been and digging down with no success. So the plumbing lines were nowhere near where they should have been. And so we had to come up with plan B. And we ended up finding lines in different areas of the hospital. And we actually had to plan a multiple weekend marathon saw cut job. The first weekend, we had to make the initial connection to the sewer that we found, and we had to cut across a main facilities corridor that all of the EVS people use. That's how they get the trash out to the dock. That's how the cafeteria gets food up to the bed tower in the Women's and Children's Hospital. So we had to scan, saw cut, dig, and this all had to start Friday night. And we worked basically 24-hour shifts until Sunday night. So that way the flooring could be put back in, the containment could be taken down, EVS could terminal clean, and the building could use the hallway on Monday morning like they normally would. So again, the coordination was a huge factor. And then getting our subs and trade partners to pull through for us was huge. We actually dug down about 4.5 feet underground across that hallway. And as they did that, they ran into 5 grade beams that were not expected to be in the way. And they were about 2 foot thick. So the plumber ended up having to core through those to get the pipe where it needed to be to make our connection, which was extremely unforeseen on top of the already hairy situation of it being a plan B and trying to get it done with. And then we had to repeat that a second weekend across a surgical corridor, which was one of the main entrances to get staff in and out of the OR. So that was one of those things that, sometimes it's kind of unknown and you got to do some investigation to look at where your connection points are. But that was just a kind of a wing it. We need to find a solution for this and pull together and, pull an all-nighter 2 weekends in a row to get the work done.
Yeah, and Casey, if this was an occupied space, that weekend work wouldn't have had to taken over like that.
Exactly.
A new construction job, you could have taken those 2 or 3 days, that 48 hours, and spanned it over a week's time. But that schedule you put together, got the facility back up and running. I think by the skin of your teeth, from what I heard on that one, folks were really trying to get through there on you.
Yeah, EVS was ready to use the hallway. That's for sure.
And I have to give a shout out to the architects. We're not throwing architects under the bus. And, a lot of this is driven by the contract methodology. Earlier is better for us. A lot of times discovering existing conditions, we have to do a little demolition to figure out where things are so we can plan. But every client's different. Sometimes we're bidding off a set of completed documents. Many times we're involved during the programming phases, schematic. And, it seems like we're able to uncover a lot of surprises instead of after the fact. You're not going to find them all, but we like to try and find as many as we can, usually involving MEP utilities before we start. And that requires poking up above ceilings, maybe cutting into floors, poking holes in walls, just to confirm where we're tying into. So, when we talk about phasing, like Casey said, it's more driven by your MEP connections than it is functional layout in a 2D plan. So, and again, the phasing can have a huge impact on schedule and cost. We'll move
Yeah,
on.
one of the other benefits we had to, Brian and I were actually working at the same facility for quite a period of time, running separate projects. And we actually lucked into a situation where both of us had to do a med gas tie-in. And he had a crew of pipe fitters working in the area that he was in. And I had a second crew from the same company because we were sharing the same subcontractor. And we had to shut down the oxygen and the vacuum to an entire emergency department. And it was, like I said, two teams of fitters to do the work itself. And then we actually had to line up two different certifiers so that way they could run around and certify all of the outlets in the department before it could get back up and get used. So that was one of those instances where we benefited from both of us being in the same place, same time, and we were able to hop on and do one of those major shutdowns essentially together.
Yeah, and that coordination really helped out the facility, because if we didn't look at that a lot closer, there could have been multiple shutdowns spanned over multiple days to achieve that work. So again, working with the staff as well as your crews and your subcontractors is always a positive outcome.
And one of the ways that we have started to work with our subs is through the last planner system. The intent of the last planner is that the foreman on the jobs have input into the way that the schedule is created, and we all basically take ownership into creating a schedule and sticking to those durations. And the old way of doing that is the poll planning with the sticky notes for everyone to gather in a big room with a big whiteboard and essentially start with your end date that you're trying to achieve, and then pull backwards with all the tasks that have to be completed. One of the things that Michuda did for us was to purchase some software from Bosch. It's the RefineMySite. And it's something that's a little bit newer to us. I think maybe about 6-7 months. I could be wrong on that. But essentially, it's a digital way of performing the poll planning without everybody having to be in the same location, with a large room with enough tables and chairs and sticky notes and space to make that happen. So now we have a way of doing that digitally that actually updates in real time. So as if we're all logged on at the same time and changes are made to the schedule, each participant can see that live. And then we are also supposed to be creating tasks for every day. And the subs themselves are supposed to be creating those tasks, which is their buy-in and their owning of their part of the schedule. And then the superintendent on the project has the ability to accept or reject those reasons. And then if items are not done on time, then there is a way to track that and give reasons for why those are not getting done. And the important part of that for us is that if there starts to become a trend as to why we're having issues with certain items, certain subcontractors, certain materials, it gives us a way to monitor the way that jobs are being run, and obviously to improve and get better.
Yeah, the last planner system is a great tool to start at an end date and work backwards, showing I know we've revolved a lot of work around delivery of furniture. So it's a great tool to say our delivery date is here. We need X amount of days in front of that to take over the space, do any required demo, any required rough-ins. And it's easily presentable to the owners and project managers of the facilities. And it helps out. It gives a clear route to the end date and shows us a starting date on that. Alongside with the last planner, we have our foreman's meetings, which are very beneficial. We like to have those up front and early as well, along with our research and checking out spaces, whether we're popping ceiling tiles or sending a camera down a drain line. And at this time, our foremans come out and we make sure that they're aware of the required training as far as authorizations and most recently vaccinations. We do a lot of that in order to protect the patients and staff of these facilities that we're working at. We don't want to bring anybody in, maybe, under the weather and potentially have them up on the floor near some folks and have a negative patient outcome. So those are all things that we need to stay aware of while, we're working in these occupied areas on different tools that help us become successful.
And we've adopted a lot of the tools in the lean arsenal, A3s, and oh God, I could go on and on. Kaizen, Gemba walks, last planner, pole planning. Pole planning is great for construction because construction is kind of linear. It's a little harder to implement on the front end during the design process because design is an iterative process and not linear. So that would be my caution on the pre-con end of things during design is implementing pole during design can be a challenge because it's a little different way of thinking.
Well, I think last planner also ties directly into phasing. Small phase projects, maybe not necessarily. I think it's useful no matter what the size of the project, but especially long duration phase projects where there are multiple milestones, essentially, each phase you're turning over is a milestone. That using the last planner system and the Bosch tool and specifically helps us do that. There are, large parts of the lean practices that are really apply to phasing projects. I know one of the keys to last planner system is just on time deliveries. So you look at materials and when they're supposed to show up and, the quantities of them, some of the phase projects we're ordering materials and it's for the whole project. So that amount could be way more than what you need just for the phase that you're working in. To go back to phasing, we have to develop ways to house our tools and our materials between phases. Because some of these facilities, they have extra space and room and there's not a whole lot of other contractors in the building. And sometimes we're given space to essentially set up our own little warehouse. And other times there's nowhere to go. So the phase that you're in, that's the space you're limited to. And that's, most always you're going to be doing finished products in every square inch of that space. So we also have to deal with storing materials and tools and gang boxes and ladders and all that stuff. And that's one of the other reasons why we implement the last planner system. And like Bryan mentioned, having those foreman's meetings so that way we can establish almost not really accountability, but respect for each other. Because if you show up to the job and you only care about what you're doing and you leave all your stuff behind, then that can cause a major impact on the rest of the trades and us as the general for having to work around that for the rest of the phase. So all of these things kind of tie back to each other.
Yeah, and within those foreman's meetings at that time, as I mentioned earlier, we're confirming that all the personnel coming to our job site is authorized to be there. They've completed all the necessary training and have received all the required vaccinations and they are up to date. A great tool that we use in order to keep these facilities safe is Michuda Mobile. It's a proprietary app that we use for checking our guys in, being that day to day we have, almost like a revolving door of trades, whether it be electricians, pipe fitters, flooring installs. But we have a lot of folks coming in through. So we want to make sure each of these guys have been trained, or girls, and have been vaccinated, because we made a commitment to that facility and we're going to follow their rules and their standards. So Michuda Mobile is a great tool for that. And then it's easily presented to the owners and project managers of those facilities at a moment's notice via your mobile device.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things, we talked about just being able to work in occupied healthcare spaces is that kind of head on a swivel mentality. So we look for that in the subcontractors that we work with as well. So it doesn't happen often, but there are times where you can get workers that don't necessarily belong working in a healthcare environment. And we use that between each other as superintendents on different jobs to make sure that the personnel coming to do the work are not only qualified to do the job they're doing, but they can do it in a manner that is respectful and appropriate to the setting that we're working in. And then one of the other ways that I looked at Michuda Mobile as well is that it's a good way for us to track incidents and good catches on jobs. So if I experience something on a job that pertains to what somebody else is doing at another facility, we hold monthly safety meetings. And one of the purposes of the Michuda Mobile and reporting that way is so that way we can share that information with each other. Because, we may not talk to each other or even live in the same area or see each other for months on end if we're basically working at opposite ends of our area. And when we get together with those meetings, or if you go through Michuda Mobile, you have the opportunity to see what other guys are going through. And that's not really something that you would pick up the phone and hey Bryan, this happened over at my facility, look out for that because it could possibly happen to you as well. It's kind of a automatic part of using Michuda Mobile and then holding those superintendent safety calls.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's transparency, visibility. Although it's a software platform, it's the cultural change that goes along with it. And the cultural piece is the toughest part. Getting our trade vendors on board with it was a struggle. We started in 2015. It took a couple of years for people to buy into it. And we still struggle. It's a daily struggle, but at least we know what's going on every day. That whole thing there where it says just cause outcome, just cause culture. It used to be an incident would happen, thank God, hopefully nobody got hurt but the usual reaction was, well, get rid of the person off the job. And 9 times out of 10, when we really do an objective analysis of why incidents occur, it's either because the owner's policies are unclear or we are lacking collectively in training. And we've had to pivot and adjust a lot of times, both with our training internally and sometimes clarification of owner policies. So you would think everybody would be kind of on the same playing field as far as safety goes, but we see a wide array in differing viewpoints of approaches to safety, depending on which system we're working with, even facility by facility. So we're constantly adjusting, but we like to have at least our minimum baselines that we implement across our organization.
That,
Yeah.
and I think it's transferable to a lot of different applications that, I don't know if you agree, Joe, but one of the ways I think that it probably helped you guys in the office was during COVID. That was an unprecedented time for everybody. And for quite a while, tons of different viewpoints, information, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. That was, to me, from the outside looking in, not being someone who's actually monitoring the data coming in, it was a very important tool when we were trying to navigate working in these facilities during that time.
Yeah,
And
we used the tool with the who, what, where is when we had a COVID case, we did our contact tracing by using Michuda Mobile to see who was co-located in the space. So we could kind of backtrack because it would always occur that somebody that contracted COVID found out about it after, they were already at the site. And we would have to do contact tracing. And it was an invaluable tool. And I'm happy to say that we're not dealing with that anymore. So Brian, did you have something to add there?
that was a great point, Joe. No, thank you.
Well, and it's really about the good catches. That's something that we're really pushing is, we like to encourage our folks to find something every day and report it out. And it's a click and shoot type of thing, but the more we report out, the more we can gather data. We mine the data using analytical tools to spot trends. And again, it's a cultural thing. We're getting better at it. Are we there yet? No. But good catches are usually things you're reporting out before they happen that prevent the big things from happening. So I harp on it every superintendent call about good catches, as Bryan and Casey can attest. So, at this point, we can open this up for Q&A. I see that there is a question in the hopper. Is that correct, Wendy?
Yes, there is. So Casey and Bryan, this comes to us from Adam. And this kind of ties back to when you were talking about, working in an occupied space and then coming across surprises, that vary from the plans or things that were hidden that people didn't know about. So it asks about, it says accurate as-built are always a challenge. How has your experience improved the accuracy of the closeout documents Michuda turns over, and have you learned any lessons?
Well, lessons learned first, absolutely. One of the main things I learned was to really pay attention and ask for the drawings that the engineers went off of from the beginning. One of the projects I discovered that the as-builts were not even as-builts, they were a 60% drawing. So a 60% drawing may not even be actually what was done on the project, because most likely it changed before the project was even done. And then improving the accuracy, one of the things that I've been lucky to learn and still play with is Bluebeam. So for the two projects that I'm currently working on, some of the engineers at the facilities, especially when it comes to HVAC controls and where VAVs and exhaust fans and all that kind of stuff is located, I have actually learned to produce those on Bluebeam on the mechanical drawings myself. So that way, at least I can get ahead of it and give the facilities guys an idea of exactly where their new equipment is located. So that way they can pass that information on. And it doesn't always turn into the end product, but especially in a phase job where we're moving from one part to the next part, I can give them something that is really accurate from my eyes, seeing it every day, that once we move out of that phase, they can use to, maintain the building.
Thank you, Casey, for that. Bryan, do you have anything to add in regard to that question?
No, just again, the upfront investigation plays an important role in the schedule and the duration. I know that from working with Casey, his first day on the ground, He was above the ceiling, checking things out, found collisions with utilities for new cart washers going in. The cart washer may have changed during the design process and gotten larger than the original one that was scoped. And that was never picked up. So the overhead clearance was not there. So that ended up creating a delay and a cost attached to it, to that project. So, again, getting in there early on to confirm what is actually true, and compare that to the as-built and any other documentation that you can get from the facilities is beneficial.
Great, thank you. I do not see any other questions in the Q&A or the chat, so feel free to submit those now, or you can always reach out to us after the fact. I believe most of the people on the call at least know how to get a hold of me for sure. Let's see. Yeah, I don't see anything else coming through right now. But I want to thank everyone for participating. I know we still have a few minutes left. So Casey, Bryan, Joe, if there's anything else you want to add or closing remarks.
No, we'll see everybody at the HESNI annual. Always looking forward to it, and always looking forward to see who brings the best treats at their booth.
Yeah, thank you for everyone tuning in to listen to a little bit of our shared experiences.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.